Hello and welcome to Homicide Hobbies. I'm Andy,
And I'm Claire.
and we're here to talk about some of the disturbing things that go on in the world, past and present. We feel like not knowing doesn't mean the crazy doesn't exist.
So we're going to scar you with the knowing.
Enjoy. What you got for me today, Claire?
Today, we're going to talk about Larry Gene Bell, who will do some abducting and some killing of at least 3 young ladies in South Carolina during the 80s. But first, a little about our piece of shit. Larry was born in October of 1949 in Ralph, Alabama, to 2 proud siblings.
What?
Just kidding. Not about the Alabama part, but he wasn't born to siblings. Sorry, Alabamans. But he was born in Alabama.
My brain stopped listening. I need a moment.
Jeez, but his family...
That's disgusting. It's bad enough that he was born in Ralph. Like barf, Ralph. He's a Ralphin, and now he's just going to throw in there that it's his siblings.
Anyway, no, not his siblings. But I was going to say, so his family included 3 brothers. God dang it, Andrew. You messed me all up. He was born in Alabama.
You done did this.
He was not born to siblings. I was just poking fun at the Alabama incestuousness. But he was born to his family, which included 3 sisters and a brother. Now, they would move around a lot, and by the time he graduates high school in 1967, he's lived in Alabama, Mississippi, and South Carolina.
They like the South.
Now, as a child, his mother would say he was a loner who never shared his feelings with anyone. He built a wall around himself as a boy, but they accepted him like any family would, and, that was their boy. After college, he trained and worked as an electrician, and then when he got older, as an adult, he decided to make Columbia, South Carolina his home, where he would get hitched and father a son. Now, in 1970, he decides it's a good idea to join the Marines, but is discharged from that after less than a year because he accidentally shoots himself in the knee while cleaning his gun.
He's real smart.
I did laugh at that one, because when I was like, he was discharged from the military after a year? Why? Got it.
At least it's not because of anal burnings. That was your other guy.
Yeah, not mine. Now,
your
at this point, I know. Now, at this point, he decides he wants to go to his hometown for a bit and gets a job at a prison guard where he works about a month before he decides, you know what, I don't want to be back in Alabama, packs his little family up, and they move to Rock Hill, South Carolina. And that brings us to the morning of February 21st, 1975. A 19-year-old housewife, Dale Saul Howell, left her home to grab some laundry detergent. Now, this isn't an unfamiliar thing of her to do, but she goes for the detergent. She walks from behind her apartment to the shopping center that's right behind it, while 27-year-old Larry is sitting in the parking lot in his car. Dale noticed the man in the car because he started to get out of his car as she's walking towards the grocery store. And then she notices he's approaching her, and as he's approaching her, he goes, "Let's go to Charlotte and party." To which she replied, no. At that point, he grabs her, spins her around, sticking a knife to her stomach. She immediately starts freaking out, screaming, making a scene, which good job for her. Well, some people freeze and are quiet and compliant. She was none of those things, which...
Stabbed. How do you compliant after you're done?
Not in her stomach, just like...
Oh.
To
at her stomach.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought he just got her. I was like...
He did not stuff the knife in anywhere. Just, he grabbed her, sticks it to her stomach, not into her stomach. Which again causes people to take notice, including the people inside the store. She must have been screaming awful loud. But they call the police. Larry freaks out, jumps in his car, and speeds off. Police are able to catch him at the intersection, and there is an open knife in his car. He's immediately charged and arrested with assault and battery of a high and aggravated nature. Now, I'm pretty sure it's his wife, but it said just in the paper that a woman put up a $5,000 bond for him to be freed that same day.
Oh, that's lovely.
Now, poor Dale would say she was absolutely terrified. One, I don't know if she's aware he was let out, because, when it's the same day, I don't know if they would tell her that or she would know. But regardless, I could see why she would be terrified, but she would sleep with a bat next to her for fear of, him coming. He
Being
knows where
attacked. Yeah, she's scared. What's with you and the women getting attacked when they're doing their laundry?
I would say, what's with the men and attacking the women doing their woman works?
I noticed that there pattern right there, because you're stuck on Band-Aid brand, dude. He attacked that lady in her house when she was off doing the laundry.
Hey, I can't tell you why the men folk are doing that. It's not me. I would say laundry is dangerous. I give it up.
But continue with your assaults on the laundry doers.
Larry will plead guilty. He had no prior arrest record, so he gets 5 years probation and ordered to seek psychiatric help. Now, he would go to a psychiatrist. Did anybody
follow up?
Shh.
Okay. Don't
he would go. Me. He would go to a psychiatrist who he would tell his mother died of abdominal cancer. Except,
did she?
She didn't. I don't even know why he'd make that up, but he does. He would only go to 2 appointments before his case was closed out without a diagnosis. Although it was a part of his probation, it goes away without a violation.
How is that possible?
They weren't keeping
that psychiatrist that closed out his case and was like, yeah, this guy's just whatever he's done, whatever future crimes, that psychiatrist deserves some sort of smack in the head.
So I feel like at this point, not to defend the actions of things going unnoticed, but I feel like it was looked on as he didn't have a diagnosis at that point. They have better things to do than run down somebody who's not making appointments, and he's a first-time offender. So I think all the things, they're like, whatever.
You said they closed it out.
Well, he's not showing up. He's not inactive. I don't know how long the time it takes for something to have to be closed out for him not showing up. But
you would think that
he doesn't get in trouble for it.
Yeah, but you would think the psychiatrist would have to report it to. I'm saying there's a break in the system here, and the psychiatrist should have to report it to probation.
He might have.
Yeah, they're checking in.
He might have, but regardless, nothing happens. Nothing happens.
Well, that's stupid. Is all I'm saying.
Now, poor Dale never was told about a hearing where he pled guilty and didn't get a chance to be heard until after he had already agreed to plead guilty is when she hears about it. Now, side note, it's not going to be until years later that victims are told of court appearances and are given an opportunity to address the court during sentencing. So at that time, it's not a requirement. Now, her brother Ricky was also upset at this because he got probation. Now,
yeah,
and because they didn't understand why he wasn't charged with attempting kidnapping and sentenced for longer. And I agree with them that it's a miscarriage of justice. I don't see how it was aggravated assault and battery. He tried to kidnap her.
It's the 70s. You said it was 75?
Mm-hmm. Now, at the time...
I like squeaked that in, by the way.
Now, at that time, assault and battery of a high and aggravated nature was still a misdemeanor, and even though it carried up to a 10-year sentence, at that time it wasn't uncommon for first-time offenders to get probation instead of a jail sentence. So police would claim that it wasn't fair to blame what he does later, that they could have done more initially, because there were other people who were getting the same light sentencing that didn't go on to kill people. So at the time, they did exactly what they did with everyone else. Although, I guess you could do the whole, did everybody else not have to do their probation requirements? Because what's the point of requiring it if it doesn't matter? But naturally, Larry's wife is done with the whole shit. So by 1976, they divorced.
I mean, he's fairly lucky, assuming it was her that bailed him out.
I would have left Jason.
I would have left Jason in jail. Well, if I found out that he tried to kidnap a woman at knife point and then pled guilty, I'd be like, yeah, your ass can go ahead and stay where you're at.
Well, I figured it was his wife that did it because that could be why. Maybe he called his mom first and she didn't answer or was like, no, you can stay there. And that's why he tells the psychiatrist she's dead because he saw she wouldn't
Yeah.
bail me out. But it's at this point that Larry's mom would say she began to think that maybe there's been something wrong with Larry and he does have serious mental problems. I was like, it took you 27 years to come to that, huh? And she's not a doctor. But later that year that he got divorced, he would be arrested again for attempting to abduct a co-ed near the University of South Carolina's campus. This time, he chose to use an empty starter gun instead of a knife. But the co-ed fell to the ground to attract attention, and it worked. Before his trial, he stayed in a mental hospital for 3 months for evaluation. Now, he was found to be perfectly fine. Larry was convicted and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Now, he could have gotten a 30 or 40-year sentence since it was now his second offense, but there was testimony given that he would seek treatment. So they went with the lighter one, thinking that they need to fix him.
Yeah. Like if he's willing to be rehabilitated and
Yeah, this
patched
is
up.
just a feller that needs help. He just was divorced. He's not in his right mind.
Even though before he was divorced, he was already attacking people.
Side note. Now, he was determined to have no conscience. He didn't express sorrow or remorse and would fake mental illness to have charges dropped against him. Now, while he was
Was
in
his
the.
brain compressed as well?
Not yet. He would make obscene remarks to nurses, shout graphically about sexual organs and sex acts, and started randomly punching people.
Um,
Now, the staff there recommended that Larry be placed in a controlled environment, preferably one with psychiatric care available for him. He was
Jail with a
then
psych ward.
he was then placed in the VA hospital briefly before the staff there disagreed with that thought process and sent him to serve his 22-month-long sentence in a minimum security prison without further treatment, nor did he get treatment when he was released on parole in March of 1978.
Sounds like he was a handful and nobody wanted to deal with his ass.
Yeah, they were like, dude, he keeps yelling penis. Get him out. He's just
He's
riling everybody else up.
he's throwing
It's the
his turds
70s.
across the room.
Let him enjoy the end of it.
When I worked on the psych floor, that's what they would do when they'd get mad. You'd walk in this one guy's room and he'd fished poop out of his butt and he'd chuck it at you as you open the door.
Anyway, within weeks of his release on probation, he starts terrorizing, or his parole, I'm sorry. He starts terrorizing a young mother with phone calls asking for sex with her 10-year-old daughter.
Ew.
It would take 5 months to trace the obscene phone calls back to Larry, their
Ooh,
neighbor.
I thought you were gonna say it took 5 months before she caved. I was gonna be like, Claire?
Oh, ew. No. But they are horrified to learn that it's the neighbor.
Oh gosh.
Once again, he was put on probation and required to seek psychiatric help. Now, every
That's
time
it?
Larry would get into trouble, he would be ordered for psychiatric treatment, and every time he would abandon the treatment. Now, the medical and criminal justice system at this point is just failing. Now, in
You make my head
1984,
real sad.
yeah. Now, in 1984, the girlfriend of a coworker, Sandy Elaine Cornett, will disappear in Charlotte, North Carolina after having dinner with her fiance. Now, she makes it back home, and then her fiance heads back to his home, which is in Greenville, but no one will see her since. Now, Sandy always locked her door when she came home, and her apartment was not trashed, and the door was not damaged.
So how'd
Now,
you get in?
her brown pocketbook was dumped out on her bed, the television was on, and her house keys, driver's license, and checkbook were lying nearby. Only 3 things: a dark blue velour jogging suit, which was what she wore, her dictating machine, and an ATM card were what were missing. Now, investigators believed she was abducted in her house by someone she knew because she wasn't somebody who would open her door to strangers, and she wasn't somebody who left her door unlocked. So they figured right off that she opened the door because somebody she knew knocked on it.
Did she
Now,
know Larry?
authorities. Well, so that's the connection between these two, is that this is the girlfriend of his coworker.
So
Now,
she knew him?
So she had gone, or he had gone to one of her parties, like I guess
Um,
as some sort of a work related thing.
so they met. They weren't
Yeah,
friends
they
or
were not.
neighbors or anything like
No.
that, but he had met her. Got it.
Now, authorities would search the nearby neighborhoods, the woods, all that for days, but they don't find her body. Now, the missing ATM card was traced to a bank where it was used twice. Employees recalled a man using it once and a woman who was not Sandy using it a second time. Her
What?
body, what?
That a woman used her debit card? That means he's got like a partner in crime type scenario?
So I didn't take it as that. I figured he used it once and then probably gave it to somebody else.
Who? Who can you who,
Anybody off
No.
the street.
If
It's
somebody
the
off the street
70s.
handed me a debit card, a man with a woman's name on it, I'd be like, yeah, no, I'm definitely not going to use this. Maybe turn it into a bank, but not. Here,
But
let me go see what kind of. Didn't they
yeah,
need like a PIN number?
but Andrew, this is the 70s. But he could
I wasn't
have.
alive in the 70s. I don't know how you get bank monies with that there ATM card in the 70s.
Anyway, I figured it
It's a
was
legitimate.
he used it, and either she didn't have much money in there, it wasn't worth his time, or he got freaked out because people were noticing him at the ATM,
Or maybe he paid a hobo off the street to use it,
or
bring
just
him the
gave it to
cash.
somebody, or just dropped it altogether and somebody else picked it up. There are crack whores out there. There are people, male and female, that will take advantage of a situation.
Well,
I'm just telling
what
you.
about the whole? What about the whole you need a pen to withdraw cash? Was that
Look,
not a
Andrea,
thing in the
I'm not a
70s?
doctor. Maybe they were guessing it. Anyway, I'm just letting you know her body's never found. They don't know who tried to use her ATM card the two times. They just say a
Wait, her
man and then a
body's
lady.
never found? Like,
Never found.
still not found?
There was also nobody to see her abduction, and since the people who used the ATM card were never identified, they don't solve her case. They just know that later on down the road, Larry is somebody who he most likely did it. He'll never admit to it, but since he's doing the abducting thing,
Yeah,
he
that's
figured out that
crazy.
it's easier to do if it's not a stranger. But regardless, since there's no evidence to proceed forward, even though the police will later question Larry about it, just as somebody who, since they when they're investigating the cases before obviously he does any murdering, they do question him, but obviously they don't have anything, so the case goes cold. Now, Larry began to struggle at his job after that and ends up quitting. He moves back home to South Carolina and moved in with his parents in their retirement cottage. Now, he does struggle with moving back home. First, he can't find a job. Then, he got one, had it for all of 9 days before being fired because he failed to mention he's a sex offender with a criminal record. Then, he decides he's going to go back to working as an electrician when nothing else is available to him. Now, when he wasn't working, he was just sleeping all day, so I feel like he was plucking everybody's nerves in his life of just he's being a bum. Now,
Wow.
this will bring us to May 31st, 1985. It's roughly 3:15 p.m. when 17-year-old Sharon, they call her Sherry, Faye Smith pulls into her parents' driveway in Lexington County, South Carolina after returning from a pool party. She was going to be graduating high school in just 2 days, and it was like a bash before their senior years were at an end. Now, Sherry's father, Bob, peeks out the window to see her park her car at the end of their long 700-foot driveway to see Sherry get
Jeez.
out, assuming to check the mail. I just wanted you to get an idea how far away from the window to the end of the driveway. I
Yeah.
had to look it up because when they said he peeks out, and it's a far enough distance that you can't see a lot of details, and obviously you can't have a conversation at that distance. But he sees her down there. He sees her get out, assuming to check the mail. Thinking nothing of it, he walks away from the window, and after a few minutes of just like she should be in in the house by now, he goes back over to the window to see what's holding her up. He sees her car still at the end of the driveway. The door is open, no Sherry. Now Bob runs outside frantically
Why?
Mainly because, so his daughter is diabetic, so
Mm,
she does need
gotcha.
her medication. He wasn't sure if maybe
She had like
just
an
the pool
attack or
party being in the
something. Yeah,
heat, yeah, that she had a low blood sugar issue, whatever. It's not normal for her to have the door open and just be down at the end of the driveway.
I gotcha.
So he runs out there. The mail's on the ground. No Sherry. Her purse is still in the running car. And it's just like, what the hell? So he immediately calls the police. A massive search is started for Sherry that goes for days. Now, 2 days into Sherry being missing, the Smiths get a phone call from the abductor, the first of 8 phone calls. The voice was distorted, and the caller was using a payphone over 20 miles from the Smiths' home. Now, the next few days, the Smiths would be contacted regularly by the abductor saying that Sherry was fine, but never asking for a ransom, which worried investigators because they were like, there's no proof of life. And they didn't know if they were dealing with somebody who was actually had Sherry or just somebody who had seen that
Some
she's been
creep.
missing,
Yeah, a creep.
which I feel like people who do that and call in fake things, they're disgusting.
There's a special place in hell for them.
Yeah. Now, a caller whose voice would later be identified as Larry Bell called in the Crime Stopper tip line that Larry Gene Bell needed to be considered a suspect, which I laughed at. No, I don't. I think since when cases are open, there it's not like they get one phone call with a tip and that blows the thing wide open. They get so many of people who saw Sherry or thought they saw Sherry, or people who saw a car by the end of the driveway, or saw her talking to somebody, or thought they saw somebody that looked like Sherry talking to somebody. All the things are being flooded into that line. So it's not for a while before it's just like when his name is mentioned, they find out that Larry's the dipshit that called it in himself.
Well, did he know her? So he went for a
Nah.
stranger again.
Now, later on, Larry would admit to being the caller who told investigators to look into him because he said he had a vision that enabled him to see the suspect.
So, is it called a mirror?
I just thought it was funny because it's like, how's it going though?
That doesn't
I
even
mean,
make sense. He can. He,
he's an
what?
idiot. Now,
Let me call and turn myself in and tell you to check into me because I have special gifts that allow me to see this here bad guy. It's called a mirror.
now, he would continue his phone calls to the Smiths. Some of the calls would be long enough to trace to whichever payphone he was using, but by the time police would arrive at the payphone, the abductor would be gone. Now, eventually, her body was found, but only after the abductor called and provided details of her location. Now, this was 6 days into her being missing. She was determined to have been dead for at least 4. So all the
Oh
time he's sitting
gosh.
there calling them and talking to the family, it's just
Giving them hope.
disgusting.
Yeah.
Now, the next several weeks, that same person would call the parents' home and describe what he had done to Sherry. The Smiths would also
Oh.
receive. I know. I was like, I would get a new number or something. But I guess that wouldn't be helpful because they're hoping the more he does this, they'll be able to eventually catch him.
I wouldn't be able to answer my phone anymore. Like every
Right?
time that phone rings, I don't know how those people don't cringe. They probably do.
Now, when I tell you the Smiths, I'm talking sometimes dad would answer, sometimes mom would answer, sometimes her older sister would answer. So
Right. But I'm
everybody's
sure
getting
as
to
a
talk to
family, they
Larry,
all
and
had a
it's super
conversation
hard.
about it. Yeah.
Now, the Smiths would also receive a letter from Sherry in her handwriting on a yellow legal pad that had been written under the direction of her abductor. It was titled Last Will and Testament. Part of it read, I'll be with my father now. Please do not become hard or upset. Everything works out for the good of those that love the Lord. Even writing not to let her kidnapping ruin their lives.
Oh my gosh. That
Now,
poor girl. I mean, I feel bad for her family, but could you imagine being forced to write something like that?
no, it gets even worse because that letter goes on to say that she would need a closed casket. And I was like, what the fuck? Can you imagine having to be forced to write that and you don't know what's going to be done
No.
to you, but you're going to need a closed casket?
That's awful. Yeah, you're right. When you said that I wasn't going to like this case, you're right. I don't like it.
Well,
It's
I figured
sad.
you weren't going to like it because the fact that her dad saw her get out of the car to check the mail. He only turned away for a little bit, just assuming, oh, Sherry's home, and thinking nothing of it. And if he would have stood there any longer, he would have seen. I mean, he probably still, I mean, who knows what
He
would have
wouldn't have been able
happened.
to.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
wouldn't have been able to get down there fast enough. Maybe it would have stopped it. Maybe it wouldn't have. But even a 17-year-old, it doesn't matter how little or big they are. Like, it can happen
Mm,
in a split second when you're checking
yeah.
the mail or going to get detergent, or just like, it's
10
disgusting.
seconds or less.
But she'll even write at the end of that letter, "P.S. Nana, I love you so much. I kind of always felt like your favorite. You were mine."
That's so sad.
Now, even after the letter, the Smiths continued to receive phone calls taunting them, and
From
how,
him?
yes, and they had to hear about how Sherry was abducted at gunpoint, raped, and sodomized for 14 hours before she was asked how she wanted to die. She chose suffocation, so he took out his duct tape, wrapped it around her nose and mouth, and then around her entire head.
I
Dur-
wouldn't choose suffocation. Just saying.
I don't know what her options were laid out to be.
That's horrifying to know that that's what she was given options.
Now, during a phone call, Sherry's sister Dawn would answer, and he would let it slip out that all I wanted to do was make love with Dawn. He had slipped up instead of saying Sherry. He would also threaten Dawn's life by saying she had been chosen to join her sister in death. Now, on
What?
June 8th is Sherry's funeral, and roughly 1,000 people, including police officers, attend her funeral, during which a man would get up and shout for the murderer to give himself up. I don't
Was
know
it
who the man
him?
is. I feel like
Oh.
it probably was, because later that night, the night of Sherry's funeral, he calls to let them know he attended.
That's disgusting.
Sure is.
What, like, I don't, you've
Now,
already destroyed this poor family. What exactly,
is the
like,
purpose of just
yeah,
tormenting?
it's sick. It's a special kind of sick.
Now, by June 15th, people would still be calling in tips. Like I said, that anyone they saw Sherry talking to before she went missing, police would get a description, papers would print the composite, the Daily News would flash it on the TV, flyers went up at grocery stores, shopping malls, hundreds of calls would come in. Mainly because they would say, like, some passerbys, while she was at the end of the driveway, they saw a man who had a receding hairline and a beard talking to her. So pretty much anybody would call in if they saw a man with a beard. So the police are running down hundreds of calls and tips. And that's where I was saying that meanwhile, somebody will be like, "You need to check out Larry Jean Bell." So they've got so much to run down that I don't feel like that tip it didn't say why. So now, some people would also call that tip line in, pretending to be the killer. Some people would call in false tips to spread terror of their own. Regardless, it ate up a lot of police time and resources. Now, four
Yeah.
people would end up being arrested for calling in false reports or attempting to extort a ransom from the Smith family, which made me so mad. They were pretending they had Sherry to get a ransom. That's disgusting.
I hope they got some serious jail time.
I didn't
I
even
know
know
they probably
people did
didn't.
that.
So I think that's why the police let out tips that are not factual to be able to distinguish the difference in like
Yeah.
the bullshit calls versus the realistic ones. Because do you remember when the DC sniper was in this area? I remember that they released saying that it was a white like work van and it wasn't, but that was how they were, or like a pickup truck or whatever it was. I don't remember, but the vehicle that they were actually looking for was
Yeah.
like light blue, and it was like the
A sedan.
no, it was like the 70s style, had the big old trunk, but it was complete opposite, and it was their way of distinguishing the difference between, hey, I just saw this vehicle, I know it's not what you guys are looking for, but, and
Yeah.
therefore they can take that tip more seriously.
Maybe,
but
but
people are sick.
they are. Now, in one of the phone calls, he would go on to provide details of another murder. He gave details of the body's location. Now, it was 9-year-old Deborah May Helmick, who had been kidnapped 2 weeks after Sherry went missing. Now, on June 14th, so backtracking to when little Deborah May was taken from her yard, she was out front playing with her little brother when she was snatched up, kicking and screaming, and dragged into somebody's car. Her home was 24 miles from the Smiths. Now, when Deborah was snatched up, several witnesses saw the girl get taken and the abductor speed away in a silver car. Now, this driver apparently pulled into the Shiloh trailer park, drove to the end of the park, circled around, and then grabbed Deborah May on his way out before speeding off. He was described as a hefty man with a brown beard and mustache and a receding hairline, which is how
I feel sorry
they're
for
also
all the menfolk that have a receding hairline at that point in time because.
Dude, they already catch some shit. And it's like,
right?
More tips. So anybody driving around that has a beard, mustache, and a receding hairline, they're all getting reported because naturally 17-year-old Sherry going missing and then this little Deborah May, it gets a lot of publicity. Now, witnesses run to the mobile home where Deborah May's father was inside. Now, he didn't see or hear anything because he said the AC noise was making too much noise. But by that point, Deborah May was long gone. Her mom had literally just left for work. I imagine her walking out, seeing her kids playing, telling them, bye, dad's inside if you need anything kind of thing. But she had just left for work. Dad just got home from a construction project, which I feel like he was probably asleep. He went inside because he's hot. Kids wanted to play outside. It's a normal kind of day.
Yeah.
Now, it's not until 5 days later that Deborah May's body is found in some thick brush on the side of a dirt road. Her body was so badly decomposed from being exposed to the summer sun that investigators couldn't tell what happened to Deborah May before she died. She was identified by her hair and clothing that she was wearing when she was abducted. Now, Deborah May's abductor couldn't harass her family because they didn't own a phone. So they opt to continue the torment of the Smiths with those phone calls.
Tormenting them about their daughter or about the little girl?
So he also had told them details about the little girl. So it's just like why he likes to talk to the Smiths is disgusting. Now, meanwhile, investigators are still running down tips. We're checking out that letter that Sherry had written. Now, they were able to lift an imprint of a phone number from the paper using an electrostatic device to lift the previous indentions of other writings. Since it was, the yellow legal pad notebooks. So they were lifting all the indentions, which naturally takes some time because they had to go through all the other things of how do you know what was written.
In what order, puzzle piece it together, right.
Because they found impressions where it was clearly a grocery list, a pet name, phone, and then when they found a phone number, they dialed that number. It ended up being a man in Huntsville, Alabama. So they asked him if he knew anyone in the Lexington County area, and he's like, yeah, my mom and dad, Ellis and Sharon Shepard, who had been on vacation. Now, they had paid Larry to house sit for them and feed their pets. They had left a yellow legal pad with detailed instructions and their son's home phone number in case of an emergency. Now, I feel like at that point, investigators are like, oh shit. So they dial up Ellis and Sharon, and now they knew Larry because he had been helping them rewire their home and doing the plumbing and everything. Their house is just 15 miles from the Smiths. Now, the investigators play a recording of the voice, and they say it sounds like Larry.
I thought it was like all
so it was distorted. So I wasn't sure if it was like they were
maybe the way he enunciates certain words,
or the way people talk. If you know somebody and it sounds like they would say something like that.
Yeah, like if your voice was distorted, but you said, "I sure fucking did," I'd know it was you.
Yeah. Well, I also figured it could have also been they tried to digitally correct it and bring it down a notch, so it took away some of that scrambling and messed around with it enough that because just like if I decided to talk in a deeper voice or a squeakier one, that you still sound like you a little bit, or enough to be like, yeah, that was you.
Makes sense.
Now, the shepherd said that around the time Sherry was abducted, Larry was weirdly squirrely and he stopped shaving and looked to have dropped weight. And they just figured he was stressed and starting to unravel. Now, once the police are on to Larry, they search they agree to or the shepherds agree to let the police search their home because since he was, had access to their home and it wasn't far. Now, when they compare like fibers that were found in Sherry's pockets, they're matched to like a rug in their home. So Sherry was in their house.
Oh gosh.
Once they find all that out and confirm his involvement in Sherry's murder as well as the murder of Deborah May, he's taken into police custody for 12 hours before they officially arrest him. Now, there were private rumors that the arrest was made suddenly because there was a call to the Smiths to tell them that he had selected his next victim, but that was never confirmed. But I feel like it would make sense if they brought him in and held him and just figured they'd be able to crack him. Now, on the day of his arrest, Larry was played a tape of recordings or the recorded phone calls to the Smiths, but his reaction to that was, "It certainly sounds like me, but I don't recall making those phone calls." And then he goes, "I don't think I could have killed Sherry or Deborah May."
What?
Yeah. Now, like I said, they had looked into the shepherd's home. They also had found 6 hairs that matched Sherry in the shepherd's home, and then those fibers in her pockets came from the carpet in the bedroom of the shepherd's home.
I wonder how they got in her pocket.
I don't know. Other than she was alive when she was there, and he was raping her for 14 hours, so... Or not for 14 hours, but she was alive for a bit. Now...
Sad.
They had still, like when Larry's arrested, he was still slightly suspected of the 1984 abduction of Sandy Elaine, that 26-year-old gal in Charlotte, North Carolina. But he had denied abducting her and killing her, but would tease investigators with descriptions of where her body was buried, even drawing a map. Her body is still never found, though. They also suspected him of the disappearance of Denise Newsom Porch in 1975 when she went missing, showing an apartment to a potential tenant. Her body was never found. Naturally, the case of Sherry and Deborah May's disappearance had created a lot of publicity, and Larry's case was moved 100 miles away. Now, it was a 16-day trial during which the Smith family sat together. Both sister and mother cried intermittently at the reminder of what Sherry endured. Larry did take the stand in his own defense in a bizarre 6-hour testimony in which he proclaimed himself to be Jesus and asked Dawn Smith, Sherry's sister, to marry him.
What? I don't understand these menfolk.
He said he wanted to have her hand in holy matrimony and confessed that he had sinned by lusting after her.
Ew.
So Larry's attorney would try to claim he was schizophrenic and that the good Larry that they see before them wouldn't have done this. And the good Larry had no memory of it. Now, Larry would even turn to jurors when he's on the stand and say with a laugh regarding his attorney, "He's my professional teddy bear. He takes good care of me."
Ew.
He would also, when he's questioned, he would answer questions with nonsense and some that he didn't want to answer at all with saying, "Silence is golden, my friend." And I feel like it made it hard to cross-examine somebody who's like not with it.
Completely stupid?
Yeah.
I guess he's not.
He would also interrupt testimony he didn't like, telling the judge that questions about the murder were getting out of business and into the personal.
What?
I don't know. That's why it's like, this shit is too funny. Like, and like, it's nonsense. Now, he said the day he was arrested was the happiest day of his life.
What?
And that he knew the slaying of Sherry and Deborah May only through visions that were zapped to him from God.
Right.
Now, when asked about his visions by prosecutors, Larry said he couldn't discuss it because the girls' families were sitting in the courtroom. So the prosecutor said, I've asked them to step outside. Will you tell us about these visions now? And Larry said, I want to close the loopholes, but this could reach the wrong ears. I respect the members of the press. They have a job to do, as he nods to the 2 rows of reporters. I don't want to give the person responsible a head start. No siree, buddy boy. I know. I feel like there was a lot of blinking going on. Like, I'm looking around.
He's
But
full-blown stupid.
he would also turn to reporters and rattle off a license plate, indicating that it was connected to the case. When they trace it back, it's the license plate to his attorney.
I thought you were going to say it was his license plate. I was going to be like, again.
Now, during his trial, he would laugh out loud for no reason. He would talk out of turn. When leaving the courthouse, he would even say stuff like to the press, Justice! Boom! So it's just like, he just said weird shit. Now, Larry told a psychiatrist that the jury's verdict would be marriage and that he would be freed to marry his victim's sister, Dawn, and father a race of superior or super prophets.
Right. Okay.
I don't feel like he was let know that it's either guilty or not guilty, not marriage. They don't issue a verdict of marriage.
I realize there's some men folk out there that find marriage to be a life sentence, but I don't feel like that is something that he is going to be granted. And I realize there's men folk out there that feel like it is a punishment, but
now,
he was not going to be that lucky.
Now, if the goal was for people to think Larry was insane, he failed. He was found to be competent, which I don't know if that just means there's a real low bar in South Carolina, but just hearing some of the things he did during trial, it's like, I don't know. Sometimes it sounds like he had screws loose. So, but again, if he was smart enough to just be trying to put on a show, there's also that too. But regardless, he's found to be competent. Now, also a side note, it wasn't until May 1984 when the guilty but mentally ill plea was adopted into legislature, which meant if a defendant was found guilty but mentally ill, they would receive psychiatric treatment before being placed in general prison population. Now, prior to that, judges could only advise psychiatric treatment. They couldn't require it. Now, the jury was played more than 5 hours of tapes between Larry and investigators, as well as conversations he had had with the Smiths when he gave details of Sherry's death, and also when he threatened Dawn's life, saying to her, "Your time is near. God wants you to join Sherry Faye this month, next month, this year, or next year. You can't be protected all the time." At different points when the tapes played, Larry would shake with laughter, cry silently, watch the clock on the wall, or crack his knuckles. Larry's defense would introduce testimony from psychiatrists that showed Larry had been diagnosed as a sexual deviant with sadistic tendencies as early as 1975. Now, the prosecution described the defense's strategy as the almond joy defense. You know, sometimes you feel like a nut, sometimes you don't. Which I was like, what is wrong with everybody? Because when I read it, it was like, almond joy defense. Never heard of that one.
No.
Now, my brain did go to that when we had that conversation of is a coconut a nut or not, because then this almond joy defense doesn't make sense, because if it's an almond in the middle surrounded by a coconut, it's a nut either way you go. That's where when we had the conversation is a coconut a nut or not?
Oh, yesterday, yeah.
Right. So if a coconut is a nut, then the whole case is nutty. And then saying an almond joy defense, sometimes you feel like a nut, sometimes you don't. It don't make any sense.
For our fans out there, Claire's done trying to grow her a coconut tree from a coconut that she done bought at the store. So we were Googling how to do that. And then we had a conversation on whether or not a coconut is a fruit or a nut. Turns out it's all of the above.
Anyway, so after the trial's over and the jury goes to do their deliberating, it takes them 47 minutes to find Larry guilty and sentenced to die. Now, the jury did ask if he got a
47
life.
minutes? Well, why so long?
The jury did ask if he got a life sentence, if he would be allowed out, and if he would be allowed to have an opportunity at parole. And since the answer to that was a yes, they opted with the death penalty.
Huh.
Now, Larry denied the verdict was given. Not that anybody actually cares what Larry thinks at this point, but October 4th, 1996, South Carolina strapped his 47-year-old ass to the electric chair and flipped that switch. Now, Larry had filed several appeals and petitions leading up to his execution, all of which were denied. Now, while in prison, several fellow death row inmates wanted to kill Larry because he would just scream for days and was said to smear his own feces on himself and around his cell and also drink his own urine.
I told you. You done acted like I was crazy when I mentioned my experience working on a psych floor with what they do with them their turds. And here you go.
Well,
Yeah.
He would smear it on himself and around his cell, not throw it. So he was finger painting with natural paints. But he'd also, when he got thirsty, he'd drink his pee. I don't know if he was doing yoga or had a glass, so you can mull that one over.
I'm good.
He would also
probably
begin...
just peed on the floor. In my head, he peed on the floor and lapped it up like a dog.
Probably. He also began fasting the weekend before his execution and refused to talk to police because naturally they wanted to know if all the other cases that they thought he had a hand in, they wanted to confirm it and find bodies. That way, put some closure to these poor families. But he refused to talk. He did not get a last meal since he was fasting, which I thought was like, who are you hurting with that one? Now, Larry also did not give a final statement, but he said his execution would deliver him to heaven and seemed rather excited to get into the chair.
So I saw a lady who, when she was sentenced, and she, you know how they're given the opportunity to speak to the jury. I know it's not the same thing as like last words type situation, but she was like, "Yes, Your Honor, I do have something to say." And then she turns, looks at the jury and goes, "Fuck all y'all." So I feel like perhaps it's good that he chose to just stay quiet.
Now,
but maybe
again,
the fasting was because he found the Lord and he was done getting his
or he made himself sick from eating all his excrement. He had a bellyache, or he was all full from all that, so he didn't need to eat anything. But he never admitted to doing the killings. He would just say, the good Larry wouldn't do that, but that bad one, I know.
So I thought people that had multiple personalities were not aware of the other personalities.
So there was also that one of where they were saying he's not actually... They said he was faking it, kind of saying, yeah, he was off even from childhood of being a loner or whatever he was doing then. But I think it was a case of he was smart enough to fake it and just confuse the shit out of people. And then it was one of those, is he really crazy or he's just so good at what he's doing that that's why he could bluff some people and then other people weren't sure. But ultimately, he was found to be perfectly fine, other than he's just a sick individual. And I'm glad that he didn't sit in jail for a long time. But I feel bad for the family that he tormented, but I'm glad they didn't lose a second daughter. I just know that dad probably lived that day so many times.
Yeah, that's so sad. But I don't know, honestly, I don't know what would have been worse. Watching her get grabbed and literally not being fast enough to get to her, or knowing that he saw her, she was checking the mail, and then disappeared. Like, both scenarios are so messed up.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't imagine glancing outside and seeing my daughter checking the mail, and then all of a sudden she's gone. Or, like I just said, watching her get the mail and then seeing somebody grab her and not being able to get there fast enough, and it's far enough away to where you can't really see anything either.
Yeah.
So it's like any information he would have seen, it wouldn't have been good enough.
Well,
It's just sad.
and even like when Deborah May goes missing, there were several witnesses and they still don't get to him in time enough.
It's so sad. What a
Yeah.
sick individual.
So I said you weren't
I'm
gonna
glad
like
they
it.
I'm glad they flipped the switch.
I sure was too. Because I was worried that when I was reading some of the shit he said during trial, I was just like, how I'm I don't know how he wasn't like gagged during it, but during when he was listening to his own tape recordings of shit he said and he's like laughing and cracking his knuckles.
He's sick. He's a sick, twisted individual. And I'm surprised they were able to put him to death because I'm going to disagree. He's there was something wrong with him.
Well, there's no
I don't
disputing
think he,
that. It's just he knew what he was doing was not right, is what it comes
yeah.
down to. So,
Oh, for sure.
what specifically was wrong with him? I don't know.
Doesn't matter. Yeah. That's disgusting.
Yeah, but you're welcome.
He's a
That's the case
disgusting
of
human being.
Larry Gene Bell. He was not the belle of the ball.
Thanks for. We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Homicide Hobbies. If we made you laugh, if we made you cry, or if we mind fucked you for the day, then we thank you for listening. Please write a review on whatever you're listening to us on. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your coworkers. We're freaking awesome. And join us next week for another episode of Homicide Hobbies. I'm Andy.
And I'm Claire.
That's all we've got.